Hi, I'm Emily Carter, and if you'd told me a year ago that the man I called my husband would leave me standing barefoot in the freezing dark, I would have laughed. Daniel Carter, my husband, my so-called best friend, the man who promised forever turned out to be nothing more than a liar with a cruel smile. And the worst part, I saw it coming, but I closed my eyes because I didn't want to lose him. That night, winter owned our town. The roads were iced over, the wind howled against the windows, and inside our house, everything felt just as cold. We'd been fighting for weeks, strange credit card charges, whispered calls he thought I didn't hear, business trips that didn't add up. I'd built up the courage to confront him that night. I thought maybe he'd at least pretend to be sorry. He didn't. He looked me dead in the eye from across our kitchen island and laughed. I swear, that laugh hit me harder than any slap could have. He leaned against the counter like he owned the whole world while I stood there shaking with betrayal. "You're paranoid, Emily, always so dramatic," he said. Then his phone lit up on the counter, her name on the screen, bold as a slap in the face. I grabbed it before he could. He didn't even bother snatching it back. He just watched me raid the messages, "See you tomorrow. Can't wait to feel you again." I felt like the floor disappeared under my feet. "How long?" I asked, but my voice came out more like a ghost than a wife. He shrugged, that shrug like my heart didn't even matter. "Long enough to know she's better at keeping her mouth shut," he said, and turned away like I wasn't even there. I could feel my chest tightening, like every lie he'd ever told was pressing down on my ribs all at once. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel even an ounce of what I was feeling. Instead, I whispered, "You can't do this to me, Daniel. I'm your wife." He turned back, eyes as dead as winter itself. "Then act like one. Stop asking questions or get out." And before I could process what he meant, he marched toward me, grabbed my arm, and dragged me to the front door. I thought he'd yell, slam a door in my face, threaten me maybe, but he didn't. He opened the door wide, and that January air hit me like a punch in the gut. I wasn't even wearing shoes. "Daniel, wait, I don't have my coat," I stammered, but his grip tightened. "You should have thought of that before you started digging through my phone." He hissed and pushed me out onto the porch. I stumbled onto the wooden steps, half, frozen, barefoot, my breath forming tiny clouds in the dark. The snow had started again, soft at first, then heavier, clinging to my hair and sweater. I turned back to him, begging, "Daniel, please, don't do this. I'm your wife. I love you." He just stood in the doorway, framed by the warm light behind him, looking at me like I was trash he couldn't wait to throw out. "Come back when you learn to mind your own business, Emily." Then he slammed the door. At first, I thought it was a sick joke. I pounded on the door until my hands stung. I screamed his name until my throat went raw. I begged the man I'd built my life around to open the door and just look at me, really look. But he didn't. Inside, I heard muffled music. Laughter. Maybe he was calling her to tell her what he'd done. Maybe he was celebrating. Outside, I sat down on the icy steps, hugging my knees to my chest, trying to stop my teeth from chattering. The snow seeped through my thin pajama pants, turning my skin numb. I thought about the wedding vows he made in sickness and in health, for better or worse. I thought about every lie I'd forgiven because I didn't want to be alone. But in that moment, alone was all I was. Minutes turned to hours, and the numbness crawled up my legs, into my chest, settling into my bones. And in that bitter silence, something inside me snapped. The Emily who begged and forgave and believed in his empty promises died on those frozen steps. A new Emily stood up, one who would never beg again, one who would never wait for him to open that door, one who knew exactly how to make him wish he'd frozen to death instead of me. So I wiped my frozen tears, stood on shaking legs, and whispered to the snow, "You'll regret this, Daniel Carter. I promise you that." And I stepped off that porch for the last time, leaving behind the warmth he stole, but carrying something far more dangerous than cold in my veins, a promise of revenge. I wish I could tell you. I left that porch with my head high and fire in my heart. But the truth is, when I stepped off those frozen steps, I didn't feel like Emily Carter at all. I felt like a ghost in pajama pants, barefoot in the snow, no phone, no coat, no plan. Just betrayal burning under my skin. A flame so small I didn't even know yet how much it would grow. I remember walking down our driveway like I was walking through wet cement. My feet were blocks of ice. My breath made tiny clouds that disappeared before they even formed properly. The neighborhood was dead silent, no lights, no cars passing by, just the sound of the wind and the crunch of snow under my numb feet. I didn't know where to go. Who do you run to when the only person you trusted turns you out like garbage? We lived in a nice suburb, the kind where people close their curtains and pretend not to see your dirty secrets. I stood at the end of my own driveway, turning slowly, looking at the houses I thought I knew. I could see shadows moving behind frosted windows, the warm flicker of TV, families together while I stood outside like an orphan. I thought about knocking on our neighbor's door, but what would I say? "Hi, can I come in? My husband locked me out because I found out he's cheating." No, I couldn't do it. I couldn't hand him the satisfaction of tomorrow's gossip, the whispers at the grocery store, the pitying looks at the school drop-off, the smirks when people thought I wasn't looking. Daniel would win twice, once by throwing me out, and again by watching everyone know he'd broken me. So instead of knocking, I walked, slowly barefoot, through snow that came up to my ankles. The streetlights looked like dying stars flickering in the mist. I pulled my arms around my chest, but it didn't help. The cold was inside me now, under my skin, inside my bones, curling around my heart. I don't know how long I walked. I passed empty mailboxes, cars buried under snowdrifts, the park where Daniel once pushed me on the swings at midnight because I said I'd never been. The park benches were coated in ice now, too cold to even think of sitting. I ended up by the old church at the end of our block, the one we'd gone to on Christmas Eve, pretending to be a happy family. The stained glass windows glowed soft yellow from inside, but I didn't go in. I didn't want salvation. I wanted something else. I didn't know it yet, but it was there, humming under my skin like a secret. I sat down on the frozen steps of that church and looked at my hands. My fingertips were purple, my nails blue. I pressed my palms together, tried to pray, not because I thought God was listening, but because I needed to hear myself say something. Anything. "Please," I whispered, "help me get through tonight." I closed my eyes and saw Daniel's face, the way he smiled when he slammed the door, the way he didn't flinch when I begged. I felt rage bubble up under my ribs, so hot it made my frozen fingers tingle. The wind howled through the trees above me like a pack of wolves. I felt like one of them, hungry, alone, feral. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe an hour, maybe 3. I thought about my parents, both gone now. I thought about my friends, the ones Daniel pushed away with small insults and cold shoulders until it was just me and him. I thought about every time I said sorry when I hadn't done anything wrong. Every time I stayed silent because it was easier than fighting. That night, I saw it all clearly for the first time. I wasn't locked out because of one fight. I was locked out because I'd let him build a prison around me long before that door slammed shut. When the first light of dawn started leaking into the sky, I forced myself to stand. My body felt like it belonged to someone else, my feet raw, my shoulders shaking. But somewhere deep in my chest, that tiny flame flickered again, stronger this time. I knew then I couldn't just go back and beg. I wouldn't crawl back into that house like a stray he could kick whenever he wanted. If he could throw me out like nothing, I would become someone without him, someone stronger, someone dangerous. I limped down the street as the sun broke through the clouds. A neighbor's dog barked at me through a frosted window. I almost laughed. If they could see me, the perfect wife in my pretty house, now a barefoot ghost walking through the snow. But I wasn't a ghost anymore, not really. I was something else, something alive, something ready. When I finally made it to my friend Lena's house, the only friend I had left who hadn't given up on me, yet she opened the door before I even knocked. One look at me and her eyes filled with tears. She pulled me inside, wrapped me in blankets, made me tea while I sat there shivering. And as I sat on her warm couch, wrapped in borrowed comfort, I made myself a silent vow. Daniel Carter thinks he's rid of me. He thinks he's safe behind that locked door. He has no idea he didn't lock me out. He set me free. Spent the first 2 days at Lena's house trying to convince myself I was safe. She gave me her bed, made me hot soup, even dug up an old pair of her husband's boots so I wouldn't have to walk barefoot if I stepped outside. She was the kind of friend Daniel hated, too independent, too nosy, too unwilling to look away when he belittled me at dinner parties. In Lena's warm living room, surrounded by the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon candles, the old me kept trying to crawl back. She whispered, maybe he'll call, maybe he'll say sorry, maybe you can fix it. But every time that voice spoke, I thought of that slamming door, the look in Daniel's eyes, the cold that sank into my bones on that porch. No, I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to cry anymore. By the third morning, Lena knew. She found me at her kitchen table at 5 a.m., my hair tied back, Daniel's bank statements spread out in front of me. I'd found them on my old laptop, the one he never bothered to wipe because he thought I'd be too stupid to look. She said softly, standing in the doorway in her robe. What are you doing? I looked up at her and almost smiled. I'm hunting. She walked over, sat beside me, and picked up one of the statements. She whistled under her breath. You think you'll find something. I tapped my finger on the column of charges. Fancy hotels, expensive dinners, plane tickets booked under fake names. I don't think. I know. The old Emily would have curled up in Lena's guest room and let the shame eat her alive. The new Emily, the Emily Daniel made when he shut that door, wanted to know everything. I spent hours digging. Every secret corner of our life together, every password I still remembered, every email he thought he'd hidden from me. I read text messages between him and his mistress, nasty, smug, full of the kind of secrets that could ruin his spotless reputation. I found receipts for gifts he'd sent her, jewelry I'd never seen, weekends away he'd claimed were for work conferences. Each lie I uncovered made my hands steadier, my mind sharper. Lena brought me coffee and sat next to me in silence, reading over my shoulder. She didn't say, "Are you sure?" Or maybe just leave him. She knew. Some men you don't just leave, you expose. By the end of the week, I had a folder on my desktop labeled his funeral, screenshots, receipts, emails, every piece of his double life cataloged and safe. The old me would have confronted him with it all in a screaming match in our living room. The new me, she had bigger plans. One night, Lena found me standing by her window, staring out at the dark street, whispering to myself. What now? She asked. I turned to her and said it out loud for the first time. I want him to lose everything. His smug grin, his clean suits, his reputation, his mistress, his comfort. I want him to know what it feels like to stand in the cold with nothing but shame to cover him. She didn't flinch. She just asked, how do we start? The we meant everything. Because alone, I was raw and angry, but with Lena, I was unstoppable. We started small. I called Daniel's company, pretending to be a polite stranger asking about an upcoming conference. I called the hotel where he said he'd been working. I spoke to a woman at the front desk who, without knowing it, confirmed he'd never stayed there at all. I dug deeper tax returns, old phone bills, the credit card statements he thought I never looked at. Every night when Lena went to bed, I sat by the glow of my laptop screen, my fingers numb from typing, my mind spinning with ways to make him pay. I knew I'd have to be careful. Daniel wasn't stupid. He was careless, sure, arrogant even, but not stupid. If he got even a whiff of what I was doing, he'd lawyer up. He'd spin the story, make me look crazy, unstable, vindictive. He'd done it before in small ways, twisting my words until even I didn't trust myself. But this time, I had evidence, cold, undeniable, humiliating truth, the kind that no fancy lawyer could scrub away. One night, Lena brought me a glass of wine and sat next to me while I made a list, the names of his business partners. His boss, the investors who trusted him with their money. I planned it like a chess game, where to leak which piece of truth, who to tell first, how to time it so the dominoes would fall just right. By the time dawn painted the sky pale pink, I leaned back in my chair and felt something I hadn't felt since before Daniel slammed that door. Warmth. Not the warmth of a blanket or a fireplace, the warmth of power. I'd spent so long frozen out, so long shut up in that perfect house like a pet bird that forgot it could fly. Now I was out in the open, and my wings were sharp. Daniel Carter thought he could throw me away like last week's trash. He had no idea he'd just given me the one thing I needed most: freedom. And freedom, in the hands of a woman who has nothing left to lose, is the most dangerous thing in the world. After days of silent planning and gathering every piece of evidence Daniel thought was safely buried, I was ready. Ready to turn his perfect life into a house of cards, ready to watch the walls come crashing down on the man who'd left me freezing in the cold without a second thought. The first step was subtle. I didn't want Daniel to know what was coming not yet. So I sent anonymous emails to his closest business partners, attaching screenshots of conversations with his mistress, bank statements showing the fake expenses, and proof of the lies he'd built to cover his tracks. I watched from Lena's house, heart pounding, as the messages were opened. I knew those emails would plant seeds of doubt, quiet whispers in boardrooms, suspicious glances in meetings, uneasy silences when Daniel entered a room. Then came the hardest part, confronting the mistress. I needed her out of the picture, not just because of Daniel, but because she was the weak link, the loose thread that could unravel everything. I found her on social media, a picture. Perfect life posted for the world to see: dinners, trips, expensive gifts. She looked so confident, so untouchable, but I knew the truth. I sent her a message, calm but deadly serious. I know everything. Walk away now, or I make sure everyone knows who you really are. The silence from her side was deafening. That night, I felt a flicker of victory. Meanwhile, the emails I'd sent started working like a virus. Daniel's business associates reached out to me through anonymous channels, shocked, confused, desperate for proof. I sent more, piece by piece, letting the puzzle form slowly but surely. Daniel, of course, was clueless. He strutted around like the king of the castle, unaware that his empire was crumbling. But the cracks started showing. Calls from angry partners, demands for explanations, whispers in the office that didn't reach his ears until it was too late. The final blow came when I decided to confront him publicly, not with screams or tears, but with facts. At a charity gala where Daniel was the guest of honor, I appeared uninvited. I walked up to the stage during his speech, the crowd watching in stunned silence. I held up a folder thick with evidence, photos, messages, receipts. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, voice steady and cold, this man standing here tonight has built a success on lies, on betrayal, and on stealing from those who trusted him most. Daniel's face went pale. The whispers turned to gasps. The room, shifted like a storm, was passing through. I laid out the truth calmly: the affair, the stolen money, the false reports to investors. Each word hit like a hammer. I watched his proud smile crumble piece by piece. After I finished, I turned and walked away, leaving the crowd to digest the chaos I'd unleashed. That night, Daniel called me desperate, broken, begging for silence. But I was done. I told him, "You locked me out in the cold, Daniel. Now it's your turn to feel the freeze." After the storm I had unleashed on Daniel's perfect life, the dust didn't settle right away. It was more like a hurricane, uprooting everything I thought I knew, shaking the ground beneath my feet, but also clearing a path to something new. I remember the morning after that charity gala like it was a rebirth. My phone was flooded with messages, some from friends who didn't know the whole story, some from people I barely recognized, and even a few from strangers who admired my courage. But what mattered most was the silence from Daniel. He disappeared from the office, stopped answering calls, and the news spread like wildfire. His business partners publicly distanced themselves, his mistress vanished without a trace, and the carefully built life he had lied about crumbled in front of everyone's eyes. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: freedom. But freedom didn't come without its own battles. There were moments when the weight of everything crushed me: the betrayal, the loneliness, the uncertainty of what came next. I questioned whether I had done the right thing, if revenge was worth the cost. One night, sitting alone in my small apartment, the one Lena helped me find, I looked at my reflection in the window. The woman staring back wasn't the scared, barefoot girl who had been locked out on that freezing night. She was someone stronger, wiser, more alive. I realized then that revenge had never been my true goal. It was about reclaiming myself, my dignity, my voice, my future. Slowly, I began rebuilding my life. I went back to school to finish the degree Daniel had interrupted. I reconnected with old friends I had pushed away during those dark years. I started therapy, learning to untangle the knots of fear and self-doubt he had tied around my heart. Every step was hard, but every step was mine. Daniel's world was falling apart while mine was being pieced back together. And that contrast was my quiet victory. Months later, when the legal battles finally started over our assets and custody of our dog, I was ready. I wasn't the woman who begged at his door anymore. I stood firm, backed by evidence, supported by friends and lawyers who believed in me. Daniel tried to twist the story, of course painting me as unstable, vindictive, but the truth was on my side, loud and clear. In the courtroom, I saw him one last time. The man who thought he could break me was just a shadow, tired, defeated, and alone. I walked away without looking back. That night, I wrote a letter to the woman he'd cheated with, not to threaten, but to forgive not her, but myself, because forgiveness wasn't about them. It was about setting me free. My new life isn't perfect, no one's is, but it's honest. It's mine. I learned that sometimes the coldest nights can birth the strongest flames, and sometimes being locked out is the first step to walking through a door you never knew was waiting for you.